Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's start with a check of the top headlines. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei blames actors linked to US, Israel for killing of thousands of people during anti-government protests. Ugandan Electoral Commission says President Museveni re-elected to 7th term. Museveni, who's 81, first came to power as a rebel leader in 1986. Since then, has won 7 elections. Syrian army declares areas west of Euphrates a closed military zone as forces take control of Deir Hafar, Maskana and other towns in eastern Aleppo. A Ukrainian delegation heads to the US for talks on security guarantees and a post-war recovery package. President Zelensky says Kyiv needs up to $800 billion and hopes to sign key documents at Davos. The White House announced a US-led board of peace to oversee temporary governance in Gaza as deadly violence continues. Despite a fragile ceasefire, the board includes Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff, Tony Blair and Jared Kushner, with President Trump serving as the chair. Presidents say Iran's deadly crackdown has largely quelled protests as state media reports more arrests. President Trump claims Iran halts planned executions, though Tehran makes no official confirmation. Reza Pahlavi calls on the world to help oust Iran's Islamic Republic and target Revolutionary Guards. Iran's security forces appear to have suppressed the nationwide protests after more than 3,000 deaths as per riot groups. The U.S. Justice Department investigates Governor Tim Walz and Mayor Jacob Frey over alleged obstruction of ICE operations. The probe follows the fatal shooting of Rennie Good by an ICE agent, which triggered protests in Minneapolis. All right, viewers, we have some news now coming in as far as the Gaza Board of Peace is concerned. The White House has announced the formation and initial members of the board, an international body mandated by UN Security Council Resolution 2803 to oversee the administration, reconstruction and stabilization of post-war Gaza. Trump will act as chairman of the board, which forms part of his 20-point plan to end the war between Israel and Hamas. The 7 other founding members of the executive board are as follows. It includes US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, former White House advisor and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, US Special Envoy to the Middle East Steve Witkoff, President of the World Bank Ajay Banga, CEO of Apollo Global Management Mark Rowan, US Deputy National Security Advisor Robert Gabriel. The board is expected to temporarily oversee the running of Gaza and manage its reconstruction. Gaza Peace Plan Phase 1, which was launched in October 2025, focused on an immediate cessation of hostilities and basic humanitarian relief, while focusing on the long-term stabilization and reconstruction of Gaza. I welcome now Andrew K.P. Leong, who's a China strategist from Hong Kong, in this discussion. Thank you very much, Mr. Leong, for joining me in this discussion. What's your opinion of the members that have been picked up for this board? Do you think it's a good representation and a balanced one? I request you to unmute yourself, Mr. Leong, before you speak. I believe you're on mute. Could you please check? All right. Mr. Leong, please start over.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please go on.
All right. Well, to understand the dynamics behind these names, you've got to understand what are the levers of power over this 20-point plan for peace over Gaza, and the conflict. What caused this war in the beginning? what are the forces at work, and why is the 20-point plan fragile, as you highlighted in your opening remarks. Now, obviously, there are a number of forces at work, and what's behind this Hamas kind of resistance is the Palestinians' long-term demand for statehood, and also let's not forget the fact that as about 20% of the population of Israel are Palestinians in origin, but they were treated as second-class citizens. They were denied a lot of equal rights compared with the native Israelis. And that, of course, is regarded as a threat to Israel's long-term stability. Plus the fact that the the Palestinians, the population is expanding because their birth rate is much higher. And then the second dimension is the Palestinians outside Israel, their long-term demand for statehood and their perceived erosion of their national identity and then territorial rights. For example, the West Bank, the Israeli refuses to even discuss the future of the West Bank, whereas the Israelis occupied a good part of the West Bank, and not just land, they control all the water resources, threatening the livelihood of the Palestinians in the area, not least, of course, in Gaza. And of course, outside Gaza, in the coast, it's a huge reserve of oil and gas. So there's a lot of interest at stake. And of course, the Trump administration, or in fact, the whole body politics in the United States, is really controlled by the Israeli lobby. Very, very powerful. They're very rich, and they're funding the political parties on both sides of the aisle, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, it's the same. So particularly Trump administration, let's not forget his son-in-law, Kushner, and is a Jew. And of course, he's a very able man, and is at least able to produce this or contributing to produce this so-called 20-point plan. But the plan fails to, continues to ignore the Palestinians' demand for statehood and focusing on the Hamas insurgents. Now, the Hamas insurgency is not just a body of rebels. They are tied to the Palestinians' demand for statehood. And of course, Israel would never want any meet such demand, because they regard that the Palestinian demand for statehood would threaten Israel's long-term security. So you can see that all these dynamics are at work, which translate into this so-called peace board, all lined up with the levers of power on the side of the Americans, on the side of the Israeli lobby. So you have President Trump's son-in-law, Kushner. You have also, of course, Tony Blair. He's not an American, but his interest after his he's now in his private capacity. He's no longer the Prime Minister of the UK. Of course, he works for his own private interests as well, and his interest is also in the resources and working with the Israeli lobby. So I think that whoever on the committee is not going to maintain a long-term stability of the region as long as the Palestinian statehood, demand for statehood, backed by so many countries around the world, let alone the Arab League, including the major Arab nations, because they regard their co-religionists and they're all Arabs. They support each other, and they regard the Israel's continuing denial of their rightful demand for statehood and continuing occupying the West Bank is something which they definitely would like to oppose. So I think that whatever committee is in store is only able to just pave over the cracks and maintain an area of stability while the Israeli lobby and Israeli government, together with the Trump administration, figure out a way to continue to suppress Hamas and continue to buttress Israel. And of course, Israel is the Trump administration's proxy
Yeah.
to exert their influence in the Middle East.
We were also learning, Mr. Leong, that Egypt and Turkey have also been extended an invitation to be on this board. Now, Turkey, of course, we know has long supported Hamas. How do you view that? And also, do give me your comments before we wrap up this discussion on the statement that has come out from Donald Trump, who says that there's now peace in Middle East and the war in Gaza has ended.
Well, Egypt is not exactly an opponent of Israel, and Egypt is more aligned with the Trump administration. And getting Egypt on board is not necessarily a bad thing, but of course it is up to the Trump administration as to what to do. But then even with Egypt included, it's not going to change the dynamics which I've just outlined, because I don't think the inclusion of Egypt will do anything about Israel's continued opposition of the Palestinians' demand for statehood. And provided that demand is not met, not only not met, but continue to be ignored, it's not going to lead to a long-term stability in the region. Not even in Gaza, because there are all sorts of resistance that would likely to continue, even without the Hamas flag. Because if you just kill all the Hamas warriors, there are others who would like to join the cause. It is not an organization, it's a movement that continue to attract a lot of disgruntled Palestinians who can see that their rightful demand for statehood is continue to be thwarted by what they perceive as imperialists.
Mr. Leong, thank you very much. Do continue to stay on with me as we proceed. We're also going to discuss the latest that's coming in from Ukraine. Now, viewers, let's tell you that President Zelensky has ordered the acceleration of electricity and power equipment imports as Ukraine faces its worst energy crisis during the war. The country's energy system has been damaged by Russian airstrikes. It's only meeting 60% of its electricity needs now, compounding the crisis, which unusually cold temperatures set in Ukraine. An energy emergency has been declared and scheduled power cuts are in effect across most regions. Kyiv is among the hardest hit with long blackouts and apartment buildings without heating. Prime Minister Yulia said that additional gas imports were discussed, but no specific volumes were revealed. Naftogaz, whose Ukraine's state energy company, revealed that Russia has struck gas facilities 6 times just this week. I request Mr. Leong to join me back with his comments on this.
Yes. Well, I think that the war in Gaza has now been going on for over 3 years. Russia, in spite of its initial wrong move or false expectations that the whole war could be won very quickly, but has since learned how to reposition itself, how to reconfigure its military complex to continue to produce the kind of armory and ammunition to sustain the war, because the Russians' objective now is to continue to wear down the opposition, because after all, it is a war of attrition. And Russia, being such a large country, is in fact the world's largest country by territory. ahead of even Canada, which is the number three, United States Canada number two, United States number three in terms of territory, size of territory. Now, so it's got lots of resources to sustain this war, and now because of the a kind of impasse over the kind of formula to end the war, in spite of President Trump's private meeting with Putin, even behind the backs of the European allies. So Putin is now doubling down on its strength, trying to occupy as much territory as possible in the Donbass area. And then, of course, on the side of the Ukrainians, they're running out of ammunition because their capacity to produce ammunition is nothing compared with that of Russia, and they are consuming a lot of the ammunition in record time. And then the ammunition mostly is supplied by the United States, and the money is coming from the European Union members. But on the other hand, the European members, their constituency, the electorate, are getting tired of this war, and the level of support is weakening. And then, even though they continue to give money to the Ukrainians, as I said, the Ukrainians are running out of ammunition, and even supplied by the United States, and President Trump is getting more and more impatient with how the war is going on. So I think that this latest tactic of Russia is to bombard the kind of supplies, the electricity supplies, so as to weaken the resolve of the Ukrainians, because the winter is now ranging. It's getting very, very cold, and then a lot of the infrastructure has been destroyed, and it will continue to weaken the Ukrainians, and that's what's happening. Is the war of attrition still carrying on? But Putin thinks that time is on his side.
All right, Mr. Leong, thanks very much then for your assessment of the situation. It was a pleasure to have you on NewsX World. Moving ahead, viewers, let's cover news from the United States, where a federal judge has ruled that immigration agents carrying out sweeping operations in Minnesota can't deploy certain crowd control measures against peaceful protesters or arrest them. The order follows widespread outrage over a fatal shooting, reports of U.S. citizens getting detained, and ordinary Minnesotans getting asked for documents. According to reports, the new restrictions on federal agents also comes after the Department of Justice is investigating Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey over possible obstruction of federal law enforcement. The probe raises the possibility of criminal consequences for the two Democratic leaders who have openly rebuked the surge of federal activity that began last month. Ross Feingold, who is a political analyst from Taipei in Taiwan, joins me in this discussion. Ross, nice to see you here at NewsX World. How do you see this deteriorating of federal-state relations, particularly in this case, although it's not the first time that we are seeing something like that as far as relations between state and the Fed are concerned?
Yeah, you make a valid point. You know, this is a trend that has been going on, I would say, for approximately 30 years or so, where the states and the federal government, depending who's in power in the federal government and who's in power in the state, so if it's a Republican president, a Democrat governor is going to challenge the policies of the federal government, and vice versa. If it's a Democrat president, a Republican governor or a Republican attorney general is going to challenge the policies of the Democrat president. That's a situation that appears, unfortunately, to be getting worse and worse, and both sides really insisting on their position, using resort to the courts, or where they have financial resources, for example, the federal government withholding funds to a state. So we see both sides using various devices to try and make their point. But it does, of course, cause, I would say, a worsening of the partisanship or the partisanship situation in the United States. But there is an important thing to remember in this situation. No matter what the position of the Minnesota state government is, or this court order that the certain parties successfully obtained in recent hours, ultimately the federal government does have authority to enforce immigration laws throughout the country.
All right, sure. What do you think it's really about? Is it Republicans versus Democrats, or really the sweeping powers that have been given to ICE? And how does this weigh on Republicans, particularly Trump, who's seen a falling approval rating just ahead of the midterms?
Yeah, there are a number of different issues at play. Yeah, it's definitely Republican versus Democrat. So there is a very heavy element of us versus them. Again, this is hyper-partisanship that has worsened in the United States in recent decades. It was worsening even before Trump took office the first time. It's worsened now that he's after Biden and now Trump, where both sides are very insistent on their positions. Well, one of the other challenges here is that ICE has ramped up their hiring and their deployments, and there probably are legitimate questions to be asked about the level of training that these personnel have received before they were deployed into these situations. And many people have pointed this out, and specifically with dealing with protesters, for example, a lot of the ICE personnel are simply not trained for that kind of situation. They are trained to detain people who are in the country illegally and to process them and to bring them to the airport and put them on a plane and remove them from the United States. So there are definitely a number of competing issues here, but that's not going to change where we are politically. What I mean is the state governments that oppose the Trump administration will be very insistent on their positions. The federal government will continue to assist the Trump administration, will continue to assist that it does have a right to enforce the immigration laws across the country. And again, in that regard, they are correct.
All right, Ross, thanks very much. Do stay on. We have some breaking news now coming in, viewers from South Asia. Now, India's aviation regulator has imposed a record fine of $2.45 million on Indigo for poor pilot roster planning by the airline that led to the mass flight cancellations in December. The regulator also ordered Indigo to relieve the airline's senior vice president of Operations Control Center of his responsibilities, while also issuing a warning to the company's COO. Indigo had witnessed cancellations of 2,507 flights and 1,852 delays in December in 2025. The DGCA has said that the committee conducted a detailed inquiry and thoroughly studied the network planning, rostering and software being deployed by Indigo for the same. In response to the DGCA order, Indigo said it will take full cognizance of the orders and take appropriate measures. It also said an in-depth review of the robustness and resilience of the internal processes at Indigo has been underway since the disruption. All right, viewers, let's now move on to news from Taiwan, which is facing a significant challenge after the US withdrew from dozens of international organizations, including key UN bodies, where Taiwan has long sought participation. However, this move could further limit Taiwan's international space, as Washington has been a strong supporter of Taiwan's presence in organizations like the WHO. Meanwhile, Taipei has reassured the public that US support remains. On the other hand, lawmakers are concerned that the US exit could allow China to gain more influence. According to reports, Taiwan will continue to push for greater international participation despite these challenges. All right, I now request Ross to join me back in the discussion and start with his comments.
Taiwan really is desperate to participate in international organizations. That's been the position of Taiwan for many years. China takes the view that these organizations are only for sovereign countries, and thus Taiwan cannot participate. On the other hand, I've also frequently made the point that Taiwan should stop begging to join these organizations. In my opinion, Taiwan should take the view that if you don't want us, you all could go away. When you realize the benefit of having Taiwan as an observer or some other unique status that's not necessarily membership, give us a phone call and then we'll talk about participating. But year after year, whether it's the World Health Organization's annual meeting, Interpol, other international organizations, Taiwan keeps trying the same method to get some kind of status at these organizations. And a lot of countries will make statements saying they support Taiwan's participation. For example, a foreign ministry of a friendly country will make a statement, but the result is always the same because China's position on this issue is absolutely clear. So again, I gotta find this. I find it kind of silly that Taiwan keeps trying the same thing, knowing that the result is going to still be failure.
All right. What do you see now ahead as far as US's interests in Taiwan are concerned? Of course, we know the technological prowess that Taiwan has, especially in semiconductors and chips, which is now crucial for any developing superpower.
I think the Trump administration, for the moment, is trying to stay within the typical framework of China-Taiwan-U.S. relations, which is the U.S. will continue to have interactions with the Taiwan government. They'll continue to have close trade relations. The U.S. will continue to sell weapons to Taiwan, as it's done for many, many decades. But the United States is, at the moment at least, it's not going to support Taiwan's unilateral declaration of independence, for example, because the U.S. knows that that would result in an immediate military response by China. At the same time, Trump has made it very clear that he wants to do business with China. He hopes to visit later this year. He's tried to have some kind of truce with regard to the trade war. So that's kind of where we are. Could all of this go the wrong direction? Yeah, certainly. It happened in the first Trump administration, where Trump started out by saying, I want to be friends with Xi Jinping. But by 2018, Trump initiated the trade war. And by 2019 and 2020, the U.S. government was initiating a large number of measures to counter China's growing influence around the world. So the best we could probably say at the moment is keep watching this, because it is susceptible to significant change.
Ross, what kind of move should we expect from China in this scenario now?
I think China is going to continue to put pressure on Taiwan. We saw the latest significant military exercise at the end of December. Typically, China does 2, maybe 3 large-scale military exercises near Taiwan every year, so we should expect that again this year. We were just talking about Taiwan's participation in international organizations. There's going to be no change in China's policy on an issue like that as well. And China will continue to complain anytime other countries have any kind of official interaction with Taiwan, whether that's European countries, Australia, Japan, India. For example, if members of parliament from those countries visit Taiwan, the Chinese government is going to loudly complain. So a lot of it will be the same, but that we've seen over the past years. But there is a very, very serious aspect to all of this, which is that China continues to invest enormous amounts of money in its military capability. It has not renounced the use of force against Taiwan, and that possibility continues to grow as China improves its military capabilities.
All right, sure. Ross, thanks very much then for joining me in this discussion. Viewers, with that, we're now going to bring you some science news. Now, a mega rocket is set to take astronauts around the moon for the first time in decades. The rocket is at the moment being taken to its launch pad. The mission, which could blast off as soon as 6 February, is expected to take 10 days. It is part of a wider plan that's aimed at returning astronauts to the lunar surface. Once the rocket is safely in orbit, the astronauts will test how the Orion spacecraft handles. This will involve manually flying the capsule in Earth orbit to practice steering and lining up the spacecraft for future moon landings. During the mission, the astronauts will head out to a point thousands of kilometers beyond the moon to check Orion's life support, propulsion, power, and navigation systems. The crew will also act as medical test subjects, sending back data and imagery from deep space. Artemis 2's crew of 4 includes NASA's commander Reed Wiseman, pilot Victor Glover, and mission specialist Christina Koch. A second mission specialist, Jeremy Hansen of the Canadian Space Agency, will also be on board. The mission involves the first crewed flight of SLS and Orion. And that's all we have time for. Do keep watching NewsX World for all international news and updates from around the world.